Hey guys, this is Sahil and today we'll learn to convert a major piece endgame just like Magnus Carlsen. As you know, Carlsen had just lost his previous game and he's known to come back with a vengeance, and yesterday he played against Nils Grandelius and we reached this endgame, which is obviously better for Carlsen, but with the open white king, you can clearly see it's not so easy to convert. So in this position, obviously the queen on a8 has a massive influence and the rook on b1 is threatening to play rook b1 check. Here, for example, if white were to play a move like h3, rook b1 check, king h2, queen h1 would be pretty tragic, but of course, king f2, rook h1, and suddenly black has a lot of counterplay. So in the game, Carlsen played king f2, preempting this move rook b1. So if rook b1 was played, now Carlsen can just take on d4, rook h1, and now rook d5, blocking the queen's path, and white is completely winning. So instead of rook b1, rook b8 was played by Grandelius, and now queen f3, blocking this important diagonal, because otherwise black could consider placing the queen on h1 and suddenly there might be some perpetuals. So queen f3, queen a7, and now here Carlsen just plays queen d5. He should not be afraid of a move like d3 because pawn takes, rook c8 and d4, and the pin is not so serious. So queen d5, queen a1, and now queen e5. Now you have to be careful if, for example, king g2, rook e8, and suddenly there are some threats. I think white is still winning, but it's a bit more complicated. And Carlsen absolutely squashes any sort of counterplay that black might have, blocking the e file now that the queen is off this diagonal. So queen b2, rook c6, king h7, rook c7, and finally rook g8. And you see how passive the rook is on g8, and white has these dominating pieces. And even though his king is kind of opened up because black cannot activate his pieces, this is not so useful for Grandelius. And now king g2 was played. f5 was also possible here. King g2, queen b4, queen e4 check, king h8, rook d7, attacking the pawn on d4, queen d2, king h3. The king is very safe on h3. Now the rook cannot ever reach this king, and the queen alone cannot really do much because white is already covering these light squares. So queen d1, rook e7, queen h5, king g2, rook c8, and now white pushes on with f5, queen d1. So black again is trying to create some counterplay, but now white correctly exchanges the rooks now that the black rook can be activated. So takes, king h7, and now he repeats moves a couple of times to gain some time on the clock, and now queen g6, king h8. Now in this position, white has to be careful. There are some perpetuals coming up. So he immediately pushes on with f6, queen e2 check, king h3, queen e6 check, king h4. Carlsen is not afraid of ghosts here in the position, and now gf6. Now you have to be careful here. A move like king h5 would be pretty amusing after queen h3 checkmate. So I think queen h6, king g8, queen g6, king f8. And now it's all about pushing this past pawn. One of these pawns has to reach the 8th rank and the game would be over. And the white queen is very active, cutting off the black king from the g and h files. So g4, queen e5, h3, king e7, queen f5. Of course, the pawn endgame is winning for white. So queen e3 was played, and now king h5, not even caring for the h3 pawn, because white has realized that there's no easy way for black to defend on f6. So queen h3, king g6. And here, of course, Grandelius did not really have a clear plan. He played king d6. If he plays queen h4, then the amazing zugzwang is king g7. And there is no move for the black pieces. If the king moves, then queen takes f6 comes with check and the queens are traded off. If the queen moves, then queen f6 again, and there is no other move. And of course, queen g5 takes, and king g6. The pawn endgame is winning for white again. So Grandelius played king d6, but now of course the pawn is lost. So queen e3, g5, queen e7, king g6, queen e8, king g7, queen e7, and finally after king g8, Grandelius resigned. And this tells us how you can convert a major piece endgame by making your pieces active, stopping any sort of counterplay, because the queen and the rook are very, very strong pieces. They can create some serious counterplay, especially if your king is weak. So you have to force your opponent pieces to be passive, and that's what Carlsen did by forcing the opponent rook to g8. And whenever the rook was about to be activated, he simply exchanged the rooks by playing rook e8 and pushed his king all the way up the board 2 g7 to win the game.